You know, if you've ever tried to learn a new language or teach one, you've probably hit that one big question. How do you get the balance right? How do we help someone actually communicate while also making sure their grammar is, accurate? Well, today we're going to dive into the science behind this, and our guide is the incredible work of researcher Rod Ellis. Okay, first things first. We have to completely change how we think about a learner's language. It's not just a broken, mistake-filled version of the real thing. Nope. It's something way more interesting. And there's a name for it: inner language. Larry Selinker came up with this back in '72, and it's a game changer. It basically says that a learner has their own unique language system. It's not just random mistakes. It actually has its own internal logic and rules. Think of it like a bridge being built. It's not the final destination, but it's a fully functional structure that's constantly being updated and improved. So, once you accept this idea of inner language, you land right in the middle of the biggest tug of war in the classroom. What's more important, getting the message across, the meaning, or getting every single grammatical detail perfect, the form? Well, according to a ton of modern research, the answer lies in this really crucial difference. On the left, you've got the old-school focus on forms. Think grammar drills, memorizing verb charts, all completely separate from actual conversation. But on the right, you have focus on form. This is a totally different beast. Here, you're drawing attention to the grammar while you're in the middle of a real meaningful conversation. And this quote from Michael Long, it absolutely nails it. See, focus on form isn't about slamming the brakes on a good conversation to have a surprise grammar lesson. It's about grabbing that perfect teachable moment right when a student is struggling to say something and needs that one little piece of grammar to make it work. It's all about timing. And yeah, this picture pretty much says it all, right? If you get too obsessed with the forms-only approach, you can completely lose the plot. The whole point is to connect with another person, to communicate an idea. Perfect grammar is a tool to do that, not the end goal itself. Okay, so if we're going to focus on form during a real conversation, what does that actually look like? More importantly, when a student makes a mistake, what's the best way for a teacher to step in and give feedback? This is one of those questions that teachers and researchers have argued about for ages. So instead of just guessing, let's look at what the data says when people actually went into classrooms and listened. So let's talk about this landmark 1997 study by Roy Lister and Leila Ranta. It's a big one. They went into French immersion classrooms and basically just observed. They tracked every single time a teacher corrected a student's error, and crucially, whether the student actually fixed their mistake. They called that successful fix uptake. And what they found was kind of shocking, actually. Look at this. The most common type of feedback by far, the recast, used over half the time, was one of the least effective at getting students to self-correct. That prompts, which were used way less often, were much, much more likely to work. So what's the big difference here? Well, a recast is when the teacher just subtly provides the correction. The student says, "Yesterday I go," and the teacher says, "Oh, you went downtown." The conversation just keeps flowing, and half the time the student doesn't even notice they were corrected. But a prompt, that's different. A prompt doesn't give the answer away. It prompts them. "Yesterday you, huh?" It forces the student to stop, think, and find the right word themselves. This whole thing led to a really cool idea called the counterbalance hypothesis. The logic is pretty simple. If your classroom is all about free-flowing, meaningful conversation, a super subtle correction like a recast is just going to get lost in the noise. You need something that provides a counterbalance, something more obvious, like a prompt that makes the student switch gears for a second and focus on the form of the language. All this talk about feedback and noticing errors, it actually gets us thinking about something deeper. What's even happening inside the learner's brain? For feedback to work, it has to connect with the right kind of knowledge. So what are we talking about here? Well, researchers like Rod Ellis talk about two main types. First, you've got explicit knowledge. This is the stuff you know. It's the what. It's being able to explain a grammar rule or reciting a vocabulary list you memorized. It's all the conscious analytical stuff. But then there's implicit knowledge. This is the magic. This is the how. It's that intuitive, gut feeling for the language that lets you speak fluently and automatically without even thinking about the rules. It's the language muscle memory. This is the holy grail for any language learner. And that, my friends, leads us to the million-dollar question in all of language education. Does memorizing all those grammar rules, building up that explicit knowledge, actually turn into the ability to speak fluently and naturally? Can you think your way to fluency? The link between these two is, honestly, one of the biggest debates in the entire field. So, where does all this complex theory leave us? Well, the most practical answer isn't some single perfect teaching method. It's more of a philosophy, a way of thinking that brings together all these ideas.
It's an approach that some people call get it right in the end, and I love that name. The goal isn't perfection right out of the gate. That's just not realistic. The idea is to build a strong foundation of real, meaningful communication, and then you strategically and carefully weave in those moments of form-focused work to help that learner's interlanguage keep growing and getting more accurate over time.
So, what does this actually look like in a real classroom? What's the takeaway for a teacher? Well, it means you always start with meaningful communication. That's your base. But you're also on the lookout for opportunities to guide students on grammar, to help them fix those stubborn errors they just don't seem to notice on their own. And maybe most importantly, you create a space where students feel curious and empowered to ask questions about the language themselves. And that really brings us to the final and maybe most important thought. All this amazing research gives us a powerful framework, but it also reminds us that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Every single learner is different. Their personality, their motivation, their background, it all plays a part. The real art of teaching is taking these incredible scientific principles and learning how to adapt them moment by moment to find that perfect, ever-changing balance for each unique person.